President Yoon Suk-yeol will be heading to Japan again in May for the widely expected attendance at the G7 summit. Tokyo's invite comes less than a week after the two leaders of South Korea and Japan agreed in a summit to embark on a new chapter of bilateral ties. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping show off their tight friendship in the Kremlin, just days after an international court issues an arrest warrant for Putin. Beijing seeks to be a peacemaker in Ukraine, which Washington calls a diplomatic cover for Putin's war crimes. And the UN releases a survival guide to avert climate disaster. The life of the planet Earth depends on the next 10 years of the world's efforts to tame climate change. President Yoon Suk-yeol will be heading to Japan again in May for the widely expected attendance at the G7 summit. South Korea has welcomed Japan's invitation to the meeting as another constructive step towards amending bilateral ties as well as strengthening cooperation in the region. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off this morning.
President Yoon Suk-yeol's office has welcomed Japan's invitation for South Korea to join the G7 meeting in May, amid anticipation that the two neighbours will discuss strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. A few hours after Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced on Monday he'd asked 8 countries to join the summit in Hiroshima, Seoul's top office spokesperson Lee Do-won said in a written statement Monday this was a positive measure taken as a result of the Yoon-Kishida summit last week, affirming their will to resolve the historical sticking points that triggered the trade war in 2019. The two leaders at their summit last week agreed to take steps to resume and bolster trade and active diplomacy. Critically, they saw eye to eye on strengthening cooperation in the face of various economic and security challenges, with the South Korean president highlighting the two countries' common values of upholding liberal democracy, the rule of law and market economy. Yoon told Japanese media before his meeting with Kishida that attending the G7 meeting would provide a chance to establish strong solidarity and cooperation with countries that share universal values, mainly in security, economy and trade. The G7 summit is widely expected to focus on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine and financial instability across the global economy. On the sidelines, the leaders of South Korea, Japan and the United States are likely to meet to discuss North Korea's growing nuclear and missile threat, as well as ways to bolster economic security and technological cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. In this regard, Japanese media reported that Canada is eager to form a 4-country cooperation framework with Seoul, Tokyo and Washington amid geopolitical frictions with China and Russia. Such an informal framework already exists, comprising the US, Japan, India and Australia, known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad for short. The Japan Times cited diplomatic sources who said Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau proposed a new Quad to Kishida in January. When questioned about the idea, a South Korean presidential official told reporters they hadn't heard of a new Quad so far, but cooperation in military and economic security is highly likely to be discussed during the G7 summit or Yoon's upcoming summit with US President Joe Biden next month. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping are showing off their tight friendship in the Kremlin, just days after an international court issues an arrest warrant for Putin. Beijing seeks to be a peacemaker in Ukraine, which Washington calls a diplomatic cover for Putin's war crimes. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
President Xi Jinping is currently on a 3-day visit to Russia. There, the Chinese leader met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday for what Beijing has billed as peace talks as part of Xi's vision to mediate a deal to end the conflict in Ukraine. During the talks, the two leaders touted their close ties amid geopolitical tensions and their shared strategic vision. Calling him a dear friend, Xi showed continued support for Putin amid international condemnation of the ongoing war in Ukraine and the recent issuing of an arrest warrant for the Russian leader by the International Criminal Court. Washington, however, remains skeptical over what they believe to be China's real intentions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken went as far as to slam Beijing for siding with Moscow, despite the ICC arrest warrant for Putin for alleged war crimes.
That President Xi is traveling to Russia days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for President Putin suggests that China feels no responsibility to hold the Kremlin accountable for the atrocities committed in Ukraine, and instead of even condemning them, it would rather provide diplomatic cover for Russia to continue to commit those very crimes.
Both U.S. and European officials are also concerned that China may even add fuel to the war in Ukraine, with Washington still believing that Beijing is open to supplying Russia with artillery shells. Not to mention, Washington also believes that any ceasefire deal brokered by China may be more beneficial to Russia.
But we are concerned that, instead, China will reiterate calls for a ceasefire that leaves Russian forces inside Ukraine's sovereign territory. Now, any ceasefire that does not address the removal of Russian forces from Ukraine would effectively ratify Russia's illegal conquests.
U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby says Xi should also consider Ukraine, with the Chinese leader expected to hold phone talks with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky after his visit to Russia. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The UN Security Council has once again responded with no action against North Korea's latest ballistic missile launches due to China and Russia shielding the regime. During a meeting convened on Monday in New York, South Korea, US, Japan, and other Western countries called for the 15-member body to take collective action against the regime. But China and Russia defended the North's latest missile launch, calling it a response to Seoul-Washington joint military exercises, in line with the regime's stance of calling it a war preparations. The meeting follows the North's firing of a short-range ballistic missile on Sunday, a fifth round of provocation since March 9th, in a show of protest against the Allies' exercise. The U.S. has assessed that North Korea has significant human rights issues, which it blames on the regime's military authorities and security forces. In its annual Human Rights Report for 2022, the U.S. State Department pointed to unlawful killings, kidnapping, and torture by government authorities among the major human rights issues. The report also cited numerous NGO reports and defectors' testimonies on torturing methods, including beatings, electric shocks, and public nakedness. However, the report says there's no indication of prosecuting responsible officials, adding corruption is widespread. The annual report covers human rights issues in 198 countries and territories to promote accountability for injustice. North Korea said Monday the regime conducted drills simulating a tactical nuclear counterattack against its enemies over the weekend, as Seoul and Washington staged their joint annual military drills. The international community continues to call for action to be taken against the regime, but to no avail. For more on the latest developments, let's turn to Dr. Bruce Klinger. He's a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome back to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Good morning. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting on North Korea's latest provocations, but no resolution or joint statement was adopted, again because of strong opposition from China and Russia. Now, is this scenario we should expect to see from much meetings from now on? For how long?
Unfortunately, this was not unexpected. In the past, Beijing and Moscow were willing to allow incrementally stronger UN resolutions as well as accompanying sanctions when North Korea did something particularly egregious like an ICBM launch or a nuclear test. But given the tensions now between Washington and Beijing and Moscow, it's unlikely that either country will go along with the what should be an automatic inclination by the UN to penalize North Korea for yet another violation. But there's still more that can be done. The U.S. has long restrained itself from going after Chinese banks and businesses using existing UN resolution as well as U.S. law authority.
Right, because nothing has been adopted at the UN level. That's why South Korea and the US are taking individual sanctions. Maybe that's a move for now. But how likely is it that the North will react to the UNSC meeting? Will there be more military provocations in response?
There will always be North Korean provocations and violations of UN resolutions, regardless of what the U.S. and its allies do. When we had 4 years without allied combined military exercises, North Korea continued to do missile launches. And so now they're just using the resumption of military exercises after a 4-year hiatus as an excuse. They did a number of missile launches in 2019. There were 26 of them, a record at the time. And then a lot of launches, including flying an intermediate range missile over Japan and 2 ICBM launches early last year before the U.S. and its allies resumed military exercises.
Right. And what's also going on is Chinese President Xi Jinping holding talks with the Russian counterpart of Vladimir Putin. Now, the two are expected to discuss ways to beef up their cooperation, including talks on keeping the U.S. in check. Do you think they will also give Pyongyang the confidence to carry out more military activities?
We've already seen a very high level of North Korean provocations and violations. So last year we had 69 or more ballistic missile launches, as well as 6 cruise missile launches, and also very large conventional force military movements close to the demilitarized zone. So all of that was even before any additional signs of support from Moscow or Beijing. So North Korea continues to do what it has long been doing, which is defying the international community and the UN resolutions which require North Korea to abandon its weapons of mass destruction programs, including nuclear, missile, and biological and chemical warfare agents.
Right. And also, what's thought to be the regime's the most worry concern is the ongoing joint drills between Seoul and Washington. So we'll keep an eye on until the drills come to an end.
Well, but I think North Korea will continue to do missile launches and perhaps the long-awaited 7th nuclear test, even after the conclusion of the military exercises. So Washington and Seoul, as well as Japan, have said that they will resume the pre-2018 levels of military exercises, as well as the U.S. promised to resume as well as augment the rotational deployment of nuclear-capable strategic assets as a sign of reassuring our allies of the U.S. commitment to the extended deterrence guarantee.
Right. All right, Dr. Klinger, thank you so much for your insight. We always appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
The UN has released a survival guide to avert climate disaster. It says the life of the planet Earth depends on the next 10 years of the world's efforts to tame climate change. Our Choi Min-jang has the details.
The world is beyond the point where climate change can be somebody else's problem. This is according to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also called the IPCC. The body of climate scientists released its 6th assessment report, which included scientific and socio-economic data concerning climate change.
The report offers hope, and it provides a warning. It warns that the pace and scale of what has been done so far and current plans are insufficient to tackle climate change. We are walking when we should be sprinting.
The IPCC said continued greenhouse gas emissions will lead to further global warming, with the best estimate that global temperatures will increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius from the period between 1850 and 1900 early in the next decade. It added that actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are more urgent than previously assessed, and that the remainder of the current decade is key to securing a sustainable future for all. To limit warming, the IPCC said emissions should be cut by almost half by 2030 across all sectors. If countries were to fail to meet this goal, the average global temperature is forecast to rise by around 2.8 degrees by 2100. The report reiterated previous findings that it is unequivocal that humanity is to blame for climate change. It appealed to increased international cooperation, including improved access to adequate financial resources, particularly for vulnerable regions. It added that shifting to clean energy would not only help combat climate change, but also impact people's health and well-being. The IPCC said the planet has already warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius since the second half of the 19th century, which has caused frequent and more intense extreme weather events around the world. It warns that the world is bound to face ever more disastrous impacts if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korean space startup Innospaces' suborbital test launch vehicle, the HANBIT-TLV, was successfully launched. Innospace announced that the single-stage hybrid rocket was far from the Alcantara Space Center in northern Brazil just after 2:50 p.m. on Sunday local time, thrusting off its engine for 106 seconds before making a 4-minute, 33-second long suborbital flight. The rocket then fell into a predetermined safety zone in the sea. The launch makes Innospace the first South Korean private company to successfully launch a rocket. The company has been attempting the launch since last December, but the mission was postponed several times due to weather and mechanical issues. Honeybees are disappearing. The rapid drop in the number of bees due to climate change, pests, and the use of pesticides has become a challenge for farmers. As a solution, a team of domestic researchers has developed a new kind of smart beehive. Our Jin reports.
The recent decline in honeybees has harmed farmers that use the bees for pollination. This strawberry farmer has resorted to using different types of bees, but the outcome hasn't been very fruitful.
A lot of bees have died this year. I'm worried more will die in the coming years. We need to come up with a solution.
Honeybees in this greenhouse nearby seem to be greater in number and much more active. What's inside is a smart beehive. On the outside, it looks like any other hive, but there's a special device inside. This sensor controls the environment on the inside, keeping the temperature at 30 degrees Celsius and the humidity at 60%. This technology allows farmers to closely monitor the hives and quickly respond if there is a problem.
The rate of bees spawning is good. I think it will continue until the end of April when strawberry planting season ends.
The smart beehive has been shown to give honeybees a longer lifespan, which in turn has increased production of tomatoes and strawberries. For farmers, this results in an earnings increase of 1 million won, roughly $770 per 1,000 square meters.
We hope to expand and distribute this technology to help beekeepers manage an environment where the bees are healthier and produce honey more effectively.
The Rural Development Administration plans to patent the technology behind this smart beehive and launch pilot projects by distributing the smart hives to beekeepers in 8 locations throughout the country this year. Jin, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start in Somalia today. New report says the drought there killed tens of thousands of people in 2022.
Well, that's right, Dami. According to a United Nations report, as many as 43,000 people may have died in Somalia as a result of diseases and malnutrition linked to the drought last year. Now released on Monday, the report added that about half of the estimated deaths were children under the age of 5. The figures mark the first official death toll from Somalia's current drought crisis. And with an additional 18,000 to 34,000 deaths expected in the first half of 2023, it's likely the death toll from the ongoing drought could exceed that of a previous dry season in 2017 to 2018. Now, the UN says it needs $2.6 billion to respond to Somalia's drought, but only 15% of that has been secured. Turning over to Ukraine, as the European Union's foreign and defense ministers have agreed to send about 1 million artillery shells to Kyiv over the span of 12 months. Now, the decision to send the 155mm shells was made in Brussels on Monday, and will see some European countries send some of their own stockpiles to the war-torn country. Some will also joint purchase $2.1 million of additional ammunition. A portion of the purchased ammunition will be used to replenish the EU's own supply. The United States has also pledged further military aid, with $350 million worth of ammunition and military equipment. Now, the support comes after Kyiv said that its forces needed to ration its ammunition amid supply shortages. Now, the world may not be all gloom and doom, at least according to the 2023 World Happiness Index. Released on the International Day of Happiness, March 20th, the index claims that the world is happier than before the COVID-19 pandemic. This is because acts of kindness counterbalanced misery factors. It's the 10th report of its kind, with 100,000 people across 137 countries taking part. Participants were asked to evaluate their lives on a scale of 1 to 10. Finland claimed the title of world's happiest nation as it ranked number 1 for the 6th straight year. It was followed by Denmark and Iceland, with South Korea ranked at 57th. And finally, Rupert Murdoch is set to tie the knot for the 5th time at the age of 92. The billionaire media mogul proposed to his partner, 66-year-old Anne Leslie Smith, on St. Patrick's Day. The couple met in September last year at an event hosted at one of Murdoch's California-based properties. During an interview with his own publication, The New York Post, on Monday, Murdoch said that this marriage will be his last. The couple intend to get married this summer. Murdoch has 6 children from his previous marriages and is the owner of media powerhouse News Corporation, which controls media brands such as Fox News.
Good morning. It's the spring equinox today, already the 4th spring season term on the traditional calendar. And right on cue, spring worms is in full swing nationwide. It's a mild start to the day, and highs will also hike to the 20s in the capital under sunny skies. Air quality has improved compared to yesterday. It was just too bad on Monday. Well, still dust is lingering in the air, especially in western parts of the country where dust levels were very bad yesterday. Air quality will be poor all day today. A dry weather advisory remains in place in most parts, while Jeju Island is seeing some rainfall, and it's going to be rainy through tomorrow with up to 30 millimeters of rainfall expected there. It's going to feel more like the end of April than late March. Seoul seeing a high of 21, Daegu at 23, Gwangju at 24 degrees this afternoon. The warming trend hit its peak tomorrow with an expected high of 24 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Southern provinces will see welcome rain from tomorrow night into early Wednesday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.